All right. So let's begin with a word of prayer.
Mhm.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Speak, for your servants are listening. Amen. So we last left off. Oh, we last left off in. Well, we finished chapter 5. Do we have any questions about
It's
anything
like
up to this point?
the arch at God make at the other country people make desolation and they cannot keep it.
Well, for now,
Yeah.
we'll see what they decide to do with it at this point. So, Irene, do you want to start reading, going up to verse 5?
5. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. The ark of the Lord was in the country of the Philistines 7 months. And the Philistines called for the priests and the diviners and said, "What shall we do with the ark of the Lord? Tell us with what we shall send it to its place." They said, "If you send away the ark of the God of Israel, do not send it empty, but by all means return him a guilt offering. Then you will be healed, and it will be known to you why his hand does not turn away from you." And they said, "What is the guilt offering that we shall return to him?" They answered, 5 golden tumors and 5 golden mice, according to the number of the lords of the Philistines, for the same plague was on all of you and on your lords.
Oh, including verse 5.
At 5? Okay. So you must make images of your tumors and images of your mice that ravage the land, and give glory to the God of Israel. Perhaps he will lighten his hand from off you and your gods and your land.
All right. So it's been 7 months. This is, I suppose, in a way, the second time the number 7 has come up in this story. Last time I mentioned that that the phrase "enthroned upon the cherubim" appears 7 times in the Bible. And so the Philistines have called for their priests, their diviners, their magicians, or whatever, and they've asked, what should we do with this? And so they've sort of suggested what the Lutheran Study Bible calls sympathetic magic. That is, basically, if we do something with this thing, then something will happen with another thing. You know how you've got like the idea of like voodoo dolls, and if you stab it, then like the person will hurt or something like that. It's that same sort of thing, that like, well, if we make these golden tumors and these golden mice and we send them away from us, well, then maybe they will go away as well. That is the real tumors and the real mice. It is kind of weird though. We keep seeing things that, like, it's kind of interesting to see what the Philistines are thinking, because it keeps being like almost what the Israelites believe, but not quite, which is kind of interesting, because it's sort of like, oh, it's a guilt offering. We'll do a guilt offering, but then it's not really a guilt offering. I mean, it certainly has absolutely nothing to do with anything that's found in like Leviticus or Deuteronomy or anything like that. Let's go just read up to verse 9.
Okay. So from 6 to 9. Oops. Hang on. Okay. Why should you harden your hearts as the Egyptians and Pharaoh hardened their hearts? After he had dealt severely with them, did they not send the people away and they departed? Now then, take and prepare a new cart and 2 milk cows on which there has never come a yoke, and yoke the cows to the cart, but take their calves home away from them. And take the ark of the Lord and place it on the cart, and put in a box at its side the figures of gold which you are returning to him as a guilt offering. Then send it off and let it go its way, and watch. If it goes up on the way to its own land, to Beth Shemesh, then it is he who has done us this great harm. But if not, then we shall know that it is not his hand that struck us. It happened to us by coincidence.
Yeah. So they've got a plan here. Basically, we're going to bring 2 cows and attach a cart to them, but we'll take their babies away. So, obviously the cows are going to want to go home. That's going to be their natural instinct. And so if they go against this, then obviously there must be something more at play. But if they just, go back home, then this is all just a coincidence. Do we have any thoughts or questions so far?
Who is giving these recommendations now? Who's speaking?
Well, I think it's the magicians and the priests of the Philistines.
Okay. And
Yeah.
they're well acquainted with the story of the Egypt, of what happened in Egypt and with Israel.
Yeah, well, it seems almost like that sort of. I mean, in the last couple of chapters, we saw that they kind of mangled the story a little bit. But this time they seem to have gotten at least something good out of the story. That is, they've realized that, well, we know what happened to the Egyptians when they wouldn't let God's people go. So, maybe we should let him go and go back to the land of Israel. All right. Let's carry on until verse 16.
Okay. The men did so, and took 2 milk cows and yoked them to the cart and shut up their calves at home. And they put the ark of the Lord on the cart, and the box with the golden mice and the images of their tumors. And the cows went straight in the direction of Beth Shemesh along one highway, lowing as they went. They turned neither to the right nor to the left, and the lords of the Philistines went after them as far as the border of Beth Shemesh. Now the people of Beth Shemesh were reaping their wheat harvest in the valley, and when they lifted up their eyes and saw the ark, they rejoiced to see it. The cart came into the field of Joshua of Beth Shemesh and stopped there. A great stone was there, and they split up the wood of the cart and offered the cows as a burnt offering to the Lord. And the Levites took down the ark of the Lord and the box that was beside it, in which were the golden figures, and set them upon the great stone. And the men of Beth Shemesh offered burnt offerings and sacrifices on that day to the Lord. And when the 5 lords of the Philistines saw it, they returned that day to Ekron.
So, well, their test seems to have been, well, successful in the sense that it, very clearly provided a result. And the cows decide to turn directly home. Justin Martyr notes that we've got another character named Joshua here, which of course is the Hebrew version of the name Jesus. So we've got a bit of a Christ figure there, next to a great stone, it seems even. And so the ark has returned to Israel, but the ark is not back in the tabernacle yet, and might not be for a while.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right. You can continue and read until the end of this chapter, I guess.
Okay. Which is 21, right? Yeah. Okay. All right. These are the golden tumors that the Philistines returned as a guilt offering to the Lord. one for Ashdod, one for Gaza, one for Ashkelon, one for Gath, one for Ekron. And the golden mice, according to the number of all the cities of the Philistines belonging to the 5 lords, both fortified cities and unwalled villages. The great stone beside which they set down the ark of the Lord is a witness to this day in the field of Joshua of Bethshemesh. And he struck some of the men of Bethshemesh because they looked upon the ark of the Lord. He struck 70 men of them, and the people mourned because the Lord had struck the people with a great blow. Then the men of Bethshemesh said, "Who is able to stand before the Lord, this holy God? And to whom shall he go up away from us?" So they sent messengers to the inhabitants of Kiriath Jearim, saying, "The Philistines have returned the ark of the Lord. Come down and take it up to you."
And so one might have thought that after the rejection of the house of Eli, that perhaps the Lord has done away with the priesthood, but that is not the case. The ark of the Lord is in some way treated poorly by the men of Beth Shemesh, and the Lord strikes some of them down.
Yeah.
Um,
Just for looking at the ark.
Well, it's kind of ambiguous how to translate that exact phrase. Some of the Bibles that I looked in said that they looked inside the ark.
Ah,
So,
okay.
I think that that's probably a more likely answer, because I mean, usually the ark of the Lord would not be seen, because usually it would be in a dark tent or eventually the temple. But of course, the ark of the Lord was seen by regular people on multiple occasions, like, you know, when they were going around Jericho, and well, the entire time that they were in the wilderness, except for when the tent was set up, the ark of the Lord would have been visible to anybody who had looked at it. So I'm more inclined to go with the translation that they looked inside it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
And I mean, that does sound like the sort of thing that somebody would do. I mean, if there was a box that you had never actually seen, but it was supposed to have the presence of the Lord inside of it, and you got the opportunity to, I mean, we might think we know better, but maybe not.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, there's 5 golden tumors, one for each of the 5 main cities of the Philistines. And we may recognize some of these names. Gath is, of course, the place where Goliath is from, and we'll be seeing him later in probably 5 weeks or so if we keep up our current pace. And then there's also one for Gaza, which makes us realize perhaps that the Israelites never, well, maybe not never ever, but they had a very hard time actually holding on to the entirety of the promised land. Like, Gaza is, of course, well, I mean, all of these are real places, but Gaza is a place that still exists and people still live there. And there's, you know, currently a debate about who owns that sort of general area. But I mean, at that time, it was definitely within the supposed borders of Israel, and yet the Philistines are living there. And so there's this thing where at the end of the book of Joshua, you know, they've entered into the land, and then as soon as you get to the book of Judges, it's clear that like, oh, they haven't actually gotten the whole land. Like, at this point, even the city that will later be called Jerusalem does not actually belong to Israel. And this seems very strange to us because we're used to having nations with very well-defined borders. You know, like it would be kind of weird, not totally unheard of, but it would be kind of weird for us if there was just another country inside of Canada. I mean, there are countries where things like that happen, but it would be very strange. But in a situation like that where, you know, there's a certain amount of nomadism and you can have walled cities, it's possible for there to be a group of people that just live inside of your country, but aren't
Yeah.
a part of your political organization. All right. Let's continue from the beginning of chapter 7.
Mhm. Okay. Okay. And the men of Kiriath Jearim came and took up the ark of the Lord and brought it to the house of Abinadab on the hill. And they consecrated his son Eleazar to have charge of the ark of the Lord. From the day that the ark was lodged at Kiriath Jearim, a long time passed, some 20 years, and all the house of Israel lamented after the Lord.
All right.
Okay, now these people are still in Israel, right? Are they
Yeah.
Israelites?
Yeah.
Okay.
Kiriath Jearim is within Israel.
Okay.
But I mean, this is a lot of the stories in the Bible seem weird to us because we have the perspective of God from these stories. And so everything that they're doing does sound kind of stupid to us. Like, why are you just leaving the ark in some random nowhere's town that I'm never going to read about again after we're done this story? Like, why don't you just bring it back to the tabernacle and worship the way that you're supposed to? And I don't know, it kind of reminds me that like the default assumption that I always have in my heart that like, oh, if I just lived during Bible times, it would have been so easy because I would just know what I'm supposed to do. And, you know, it would just be clear and, you know, like obviously if I was put into a situation where I had to either go to the temple of the Lord or like the temple of Dagon, obviously I would do the right thing. But it becomes clearer and clearer, I think, the more you read the Old Testament, that that's not really the case. That like real people did make these weird decisions for reasons that don't fully make sense to us.
Mhm.
And yeah, there's just a little bit of something there that is hard for us to understand, but maybe from the perspective of later people, what we're up to would also look strange in some way. Like, I mean, it's also easy for us to look at the Middle Ages and say like, oh, couldn't they see that like the church was corrupt and everything was really weird? Like, how did they not think it was strange that they were only taking communion like once a year and that they weren't hearing the Bible read in their own language? Like, surely they would have understood that that was strange. I mean, it's very easy for us to say that now, but if that's all you know, maybe not.
Now, the last line that says, and all of Israel lamented the Lord, is that because the ark was not where it was supposed to be?
Well, I mean, that is the question, because as we're going to see in the next couple of verses, I'm not entirely clear on what lamented after the Lord means, because it seems like a lot of them show their sadness by just completely abandoning the Israelite religion. So
Oh boy.
it's not entirely clear.
Okay.
But this actually is kind of a helpful number there, though, because that gives a certain limit to the length of Saul's reign. So that's kind of helpful, actually. Thanks to a very weird property of a later part of the book of Samuel, we don't know exactly how long Saul was on the throne, but this can give us a sort of hint that from here to the ark being taken away from this place, there's 20 years. And I believe that it's David who finally takes the ark away from that place. So, so Saul's reign couldn't have been more than 20 years.
Okay, so Saul's going to reign during the time that it's away, that the ark is there at that spot.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Let's continue to about verse 11.
3?
Yeah, from 3 to about 11.
3 to 11. 11. Okay. All right. And Samuel said to all the house of Israel, if you are returning to the Lord with all your heart, then put away the foreign gods and the Ashtaroth from among you, and direct your heart to the Lord and serve him only, and he will deliver you out of the hand of the Philistines. So the people of Israel put away the Baals and the Ashtaroth, and they served the Lord only. Then Samuel said, gather all Israel at Mizpah, and I will pray to the Lord for you. So they gathered at Mizpah and drew water and poured it out before the Lord and fasted on that day and said there, we have sinned against the Lord. And Samuel judged the people of Israel at Mizpah. Now when the Philistines heard that the people of Israel had gathered at Mizpah, the lords of the Philistines went up against Israel. And when the people of Israel heard of it, they were afraid of the Philistines. And the people of Israel said to Samuel, do not cease to cry out to the Lord our God for us, that he may save us from the hand of the Philistines. So Samuel took a nursing lamb and offered it as a whole burnt offering to the Lord. And Samuel cried out to the Lord for Israel, and the Lord answered him. As Samuel was offering up the burnt offering, the Philistines drew near to attack Israel. But the Lord thundered with a mighty sound that day against the Philistines and threw them into confusion, and they were defeated before Israel. And the men of Israel went out from Mizpah and pursued the Philistines and struck them as far as below Beth-kar.
So we see that there was a certain amount of turning away from the Lord. And now it's not entirely clear when the house of Israel began to lament after the Lord, whether it's immediately after they lost the ark or while the ark was at Kiriath Jearim, or if it's right before verse 3 that this happens. But it seems to be that there has been a certain amount of idolatry among the people. Generally, what we've got here is the Ashtaroth. So this is an example, I believe. Actually, I'm not 100% sure about that. I was going to say that this is an example of them changing the names of one of the gods, but I'm not 100% sure about that. But basically, the idea was that you had Baal, who was one of the favorite gods of the Canaanite pantheon, and then you have Ashtaroth, or occasionally Asherah, who's sort of like his wife or something. And you occasionally see Asherah sort of brought into even Israelite religion against God's wishes, of course. But we have mention of this in the book of Jeremiah, where apparently it seems that the women of Israel were making sacrifices to Asherah, and Jeremiah says, like, obviously you should not have done this. And then the women say, well, did our husbands not know about this? Like, you know, we've been doing this for ages.
So out of ignorance? They were doing it out of ignorance?
Well, I mean, that is the question. I mean, ignorance from a certain perspective, I mean, ignorance of what they should be doing, perhaps. I mean, whether that means that, you know, somebody told them not to and they didn't care, or what exactly, it's not sure. But there seemed to be a very common instinct within Canaanite religion to provide God with some sort of wife, which is interesting because it has a certain association with like a lot of other things that are worth thinking about, I guess. Like basically, like, who is God's wife? In the Old Testament, it's Israel. And so there's a sort of lesson here for us, I guess, which is that, well, I mean, put it simply, we shouldn't worship the church because in a way, Israel is God's wife and the church is the bride of Christ. but we need to make sure to understand this in the proper way and not try to elevate the church so that the church is some sort of, universal principle beside the God. And you've got, God and the church next to each other. In fact, as former Roman Catholics, you'll find this interesting, actually. One of the titles of Asherah was something along the lines of, and it's hard to know exactly how to translate it because it's in a language that's sort of like Hebrew, but not exactly. So there's a little bit of ambiguity as to what's going on, but something along the lines of Lady of the Sea, which may sound a little bit familiar to you as former Roman Catholics. Like, have you ever heard of Mary referred to as Lady of the Sea?
No.
Or like,
well, I've heard of the Stella Maris Church, but doesn't that mean Star of the Sea?
Something like that. Yeah. But there is, I don't know. And I'm not saying that, therefore these two things are exactly the same. But
Yeah.
I mean, there is a sort of, there is some sort of instinct in, I don't know what exactly, Middle Eastern religion, the human heart, I'm not sure, to understand that God does have some sort of thing that's associated with him, which is in reality the church and not some sort of goddess. And to understand that in some way, there's something associated with water there. One of the ways that they tried to translate it, and by they, I mean like modern scholars tried to translate it as maybe like somebody who walks on the ocean or something like that. Kind of reminds me of Peter walking after being called out of the boat by Christ. And so with all these things, there is a bad version and a good version, because of course the devil cannot invent any new thing of his own. He can only take and twist what already exists.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I guess you could say that Catholics did that by elevating Mary the way they do.
Yeah. So Samuel pours out water before the Lord. This is sort of one of many Old Testament types of baptism that he draws water and pours it out before the Lord and confesses his sins there.
What you were saying before about the women saying that they had been practicing worshiping, making offerings to Ashtaroth for a long time, and how come their husbands never said anything? Would that coincide with the times that the years that Eli was the high priest and he wasn't reprimanding anybody?
No, because this was in the time of Jeremiah, so this would have been right before the exile.
So, when it's talking about the women giving to the Ashtaroth? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's much later. But I mean, they did seem to be using them at some point. I mean, that is the question, like, when do they bring them in? Like, did they start doing this once the ark was lost, or did they start doing this long before? I mean, the answer is probably a little bit of both. I mean, if we learn anything from the book of Judges and from also the book of Kings as well, is that this is a constant struggle at all times to fight away idolatry, as it is, of course, also a constant struggle in our own lives, not in quite as literal and concrete a way, but as Luther writes in the Large Catechism, our God is whoever we look to for all of our good and trust to provide us with our needs. So we too have to be watchful, even though, maybe we're not tempted to, sacrifice a horse to Thor. All right. Let's continue from 12 to 17, I guess.
Yep. Okay. Then Samuel took a stone and set it up between Mizpah and Shen, and called its name Ebenezer, for he said, "Till now the Lord has helped us." So the Philistines were subdued and did not again enter the territory of Israel. And the hand of the Lord was against the Philistines all the days of Samuel. The cities that the Philistines had taken from Israel were restored to Israel, from Ekron to Gath, and Israel delivered their territory from the hand of the Philistines. There was peace also between Israel and the Amorites. Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life, and he went on a circuit year by year to Bethel, Gilgal, and Mizpah, and he judged Israel in all these places. Then he would return to Ramah, for his home was there, and there also he judged Israel, and he built there an altar to the Lord.
So Samuel sets up a stone and calls it Ebenezer, which you may remember from that one hymn, "Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing." Ebenezer means stone of help. He calls it that because till now the Lord has helped us. And of course, as that hymn reminds us, prone to wander, Lord, I feel it, prone to leave the Lord I love. All the days of Samuel, the hand of the Lord is against the Philistines. And they do get Ekron and Gath back. So that's nice. Samuel sets himself up as a judge. And so Samuel is, I guess, kind of the last of the judges. Saul has a bit of a judge-like flavor occasionally, but Samuel, I think, is the last one who is actually called a judge. So Bethel, Gilgal, and Mizpah, these places are near to Ramah, which of course is his hometown, the town that his parents were from. So it appears that he does eventually go back there as a grown man. Which raises questions, who is in charge of the tabernacle right now? Because, I mean, Eli's not in charge of it. His sons are dead. It doesn't seem like Samuel's in charge of it unless he's bringing the tabernacle with him, which might be the case. So these cities are all near to Ramah. They're also very near to Jerusalem as well, which, as I mentioned earlier, is not currently in the hands of Israel. But we see Samuel here sort of in his prime, so to speak, and almost establishing himself as a king. He is a prophet, and now he's judging Israel, and he set up an altar in his hometown. It is the natural tendency of every ancient Near East royalty figure to want to set themselves right up next to the temple, basically. You see this in like every ancient Near Eastern city, that you've got like the palace and you've got the temple. And in fact, this is going to be David's instinct as well. He sets up his son Solomon to do exactly the same thing in Jerusalem, to build the palace and then build the temple right next to it. And this is, of course, a sort of sign of authority. Something that I haven't fully wrapped my mind around is whether Israelites were allowed to build altars to the Lord or not. Because basically the entirety of the Torah seems to imply that like everything that you're doing worship-wise has to be done at the tabernacle or at the temple once the temple is built and replaces the tabernacle. There isn't really an assumption that there's going to be all these altars all over the place. And it seems like in some parts of the Bible, the fact that there's all these altars all over the place creates problems. But then other times in the Bible, you'll just have something like this, where Samuel just builds an altar to the Lord, and it doesn't really seem to be a big deal. Like nobody says, and it was bad and he shouldn't have done that and it caused the Israelites to sin or anything like that. He just builds an altar to the Lord, and he just, judges Israel for many years, and as we'll see soon, long enough to have sons. And he's never told that he shouldn't have done that or anything. So I guess that's a bit of an open question as far as I'm concerned. I don't really know what the answer is to, like, should he have been allowed to do that or not. But what I can say is that he does, and it has some sort of narrative significance, which is that Samuel really does seem to want to be king-like in some respect. But the Bible doesn't specifically say, and he shouldn't have done that. Thankfully, we don't have to worry about that too much, because we're not really worried about, whether we're supposed to be building other altars of sacrifice. I mean, we do have something in our church called an altar, but it's not like we're, roasting meat on it. So there is a little bit of a difference there. There's a certain amount of connection too, but it'd be a bit difficult for us if we all had to trek all the way to the Holy Land every Sunday. So we've come to the end of chapter 7. Do you have any thoughts or questions?
Does your study Bible have any notes on those 2 chapters or anything in particular?
Well, I mean, a lot of the things that I bring up are just things that I've stolen from the study Bible anyways.
Okay.
But I don't think it specifically has anything. Yeah, oh yeah, it almost looks like it does, but then it doesn't really. It just sort of notes that Samuel is sort of starting to, well, fulfill the sort of threefold pattern that I mentioned, the only good thing Calvin ever gave us, which was a prophet, priest, and king, which is that right now Samuel is a priest and he is a prophet and he's a judge, at least. He definitely does have some sort of political authority over people. So it looks like he's almost heading in that direction.
Okay, so wait a minute. Does that mean that the priests who preceded him didn't have that kind of power?
Well, they definitely had the authority to judge like religious matters, but prophets and priests were 2 separate things.
Okay.
And then priests didn't necessarily have any political power, although occasionally they did. Like during the time of the Maccabees, for example, high priest was basically a political office, like one that people would bribe their way into and do all sorts of backstabbing and political intrigue to get, because you were basically in charge of Jerusalem and probably the Jews in general if you were high priest during the Maccabean period. But there's nothing inherent to the role of high priest that would give you like political authority, except insofar as it related to the temple.
Okay. So then he's unique among the priests then.
Yeah. I mean, it's not entirely clear how unique he is, because there are questions about like, where is the tabernacle right now? But in terms of his ability to judge, that is unique, yes.
Okay.
So I will end by reading Psalm 80. Give ear, O shepherd of Israel, you who lead Joseph like a flock. You who are enthroned upon the cherubim, shine forth. Before Ephraim and Benjamin and Manasseh, stir up your might and come to save us. Restore us, O God. Let your face shine, that we may be saved. O Lord God of hosts, how long will you be angry with your people's prayers? You have fed them with the bread of tears and given them tears to drink in full measure. You make us an object of contention for our neighbors, and our enemies laugh among themselves. Restore us, O God of hosts. Let your face shine, that we may be saved. You brought a vine out of Egypt. You drove out the nations and planted it. You cleared the ground for it. It took deep root and filled the land. The mountains were covered with its shade, the mighty cedars with its branches. It sent out its branches to the sea and its shoots to the river. Why then have you broken down its walls so that all who pass along the way pluck its fruit? The boar from the forest ravages it. and all that move in the field feed on it. Turn again, O God of hosts, look down from heaven and see, have regard for this vine, the stalk that your right hand planted, and for the son whom you made strong for yourself. They have burned it with fire, they have cut it down. May they perish at the rebuke of your face. But let your hand be on the man of your right hand, the Son of Man whom you have made strong for yourself. Then we shall not turn back from you. Give us life, and we will call upon your name. Restore us, O Lord God of hosts. Let your face shine, that we may be saved.
Mhm.
I'm going to finish recording now.